The rifle range at Camp Meridian fell silent except for the whistle of desert wind through the canyon walls. Elena Vasquez knelt beside her equipment case, methodically cleaning her scope with the same careful precision she brought to everything else. The morning sun cast long shadows across the shooting benches, where other competitors prepared for the inter-service marksmanship trials, their conversations a low murmur of technical discussions and good-natured rivalry. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Hey, cleaning lady, a voice cut through the peaceful atmosphere. Like a rusty blade, you sure you're in the right place? Elena didn't look up from her scope, continuing her meticulous work as Boots approached her position. She recognized the voice before she saw the polished insignia on the approaching uniform. Staff Sergeant Derek Holbrook, 3-time base champion, whose ego matched his reputation for humiliating anyone who dared challenge his supremacy on the range. Holbrook's shadow fell across her equipment case as he loomed over her position, flanked by his usual crew of admirers. His voice carried that particular tone of condescension reserved for those he considered beneath notice. This is a serious competition, sweetheart. Maybe you'd be more comfortable in the kitchen tent with the other support staff. Elena's hands never paused in their work, though something flickered behind her dark eyes. Around them, other shooters had stopped their preparations to watch the confrontation unfold. Several pulled out phones, sensing drama worth recording. The registration says Elena Vasquez, Supply Corps. Holbrook continued, reading from a clipboard. With theatrical disgust. Supply Corps? What's next? Are we letting the postal clerks compete too? His entourage laughed on cue, their mockery echoing off the canyon walls. Finally, Elena looked up. Her face remained composed, almost serene, as she met Holbrook's sneering gaze. I'm registered for the Precision Division, she said quietly. Her voice barely audible over the wind. Precision Division? Holbrook's laughter was harsh and ugly. Honey, this isn't about hitting paper targets at 50 yards. We're talking about real marksmanship here. 1,000-yard shots in crosswinds that would knock you over. Elena returned to her scope cleaning, her movements steady and unhurried. This response only seemed to inflame Holbrook further. He kicked at the dust near her equipment case, sending a small cloud drifting toward her carefully arranged gear. You know what? He announced to his growing audience. I'll make this interesting. How about a little side bet? Since you're so confident. In your Supply Corps training. He gestured grandly toward the furthest target stand, barely visible as a speck in the distance. That's 1,000 yards. Standard target. But here's the twist. He reached into his pocket and produced a dime, holding it up so the sun caught its silver surface. Anyone can hit a target. But can you hit this? The coin caught the light as he flipped it casually in his palm. One shot 1,000 yards with this crosswind. Hit the dime, and I'll personally apologize to every shooter on this range. Miss it, and you pack up your little cleaning kit and find somewhere more suitable for someone of your capabilities. The crowd stirred with interest. Even the most experienced marksmen recognized the near impossibility of such a shot. A dime at 1,000 yards in perfect conditions was challenging enough. With the notorious desert crosswinds of Camp Meridian, it bordered on impossible. Elena's hands stilled on her scope. For a moment, something passed across her features too quickly to read. Then she looked up at Holbrook with those same calm eyes. And if I split the dime? The question hung in the air like smoke. Holbrook's confident smirk faltered slightly before returning full force. Split it? Now you're just being ridiculous. But sure, if you somehow manage that miracle shot, He paused, clearly not expecting this response. I'll recommend you for whatever posting you want. Hell, I'll even carry your gear to the helicopter. Elena nodded once, as if filing away the terms of their agreement. She closed her equipment case with methodical care and reached for the rifle that had been lying beside her, wrapped in worn canvas. As she began to unwrap it, conversations around the range died away. The weapon that emerged was not what anyone expected. Instead of the standard military-issue rifle most competitors used, Elena revealed a custom precision rifle that spoke of serious craftsmanship. The stock was worn smooth in places, marked with small notches that suggested extensive use. The scope mounted on top was of a quality that made even the experienced shooters take notice. "Now that's interesting," murmured Captain Sarah Chun. The range master, as she observed from her position near the timing equipment. She'd been quietly watching the confrontation unfold, her trained eye cataloging details that others missed. The way Elena handled her weapon, the unconscious competence in her movements, the complete lack of nervousness despite the growing crowd of spectators. Elena began her rifle inspection with movements so fluid they seemed choreographed. Check the bolt, examine the barrel, test the trigger pull. Each action flowed into the next with the kind of muscle memory that comes from thousands of repetitions. She loaded a single cartridge into the chamber, the metallic click audible in the growing silence. "Hold on there, Annie Oakley," Holbrook interrupted, his voice carrying a note of uncertainty he hadn't shown before. "You haven't even asked about wind conditions. Don't you want to know the range data?" Elena glanced up at the flags strung along the range, watching them flutter in the complex wind patterns that made Camp Meridian notorious among precision shooters. Southwest to west, gusting 12 to 18 knots, with thermal shifts from the canyon walls, she said matter-of-factly. Temperatures rising, so the thermals will intensify over the next hour. The casual accuracy of her assessment drew surprised looks from the experienced shooters present. Reading wind conditions at that level of detail wasn't something learned from basic marksmanship courses. Captain Chun stepped forward, her interest clearly piqued. "Specialist Vasquez, I need to verify your credentials for this shot. This is highly irregular." Elena handed over her military identification without comment. Chun examined it carefully, noting the various stamps and codes that indicated service history. Her eyebrows rose slightly as she processed the information, but she maintained her professional composure. "The shot is authorized," Chun announced to the gathering crowd. "However, given the extreme difficulty and safety considerations, I'm implementing full-range protocols. All spectators behind the safety line, spotting scopes on the target area, and medical personnel on standby." As the range prepared for the unprecedented attempt, Elena settled into her shooting position with practiced ease. She adjusted her bipod with minute precision, checked her scope settings, and began the breathing exercises that would steady her for the shot. Her movements were economical, purposeful, suggesting training that went far beyond basic military instruction. The dime had been placed on a stand at the 1,000-yard line, its silver surface barely visible even through high-powered spotting. Scopes. The desert wind continued its chaotic dance across the range, creating updrafts and downdrafts that would challenge even the most experienced marksmen. "This is insane," whispered Corporal Martinez, one of the competition favorites, as he watched through his spotting scope. "I can barely see the dime, let alone hit it. The wind drift alone would be." "Quiet on the range," Captain Chun commanded. "Shooter, you may proceed when ready." Elena closed her eyes for a moment, her breathing deep and controlled. When she opened them again, something had changed. The casual competence was still there, but underneath it was something else. A stillness, a focus that seemed to draw energy from the desert air itself. She settled her cheek against the rifle stock, her eye finding the scope with familiar ease. Through the glass, the distant target stand swam into view, the tiny silver coin barely distinguishable against the desert backdrop. She began her mental calculations, factoring wind speed, direction, temperature, humidity, even the Coriolis effect that would influence a bullet's path over such extreme distance. The wind shifted, and Elena waited. then shifted again, and still. She waited. Minutes passed as she read the complex air currents, looking for the perfect moment when chaos would briefly align into predictability. Finally, her finger found the trigger. The breath in her lungs stilled. Her heartbeat slowed. The world narrowed to the crosshairs in her scope, and the impossible target that waited in the distance. The thunderclap of the rifle's discharge echoed off the canyon walls like a judge's gavel, final and absolute. Elena remained motionless in her shooting position, eyes still pressed to the scope, watching as her bullet traced its arc across the impossible distance. The gathered crowd held its collective breath, every eye straining toward the distant target stand through binoculars and spotting scopes. At the 1,000-yard line, a small puff of dust marked where something had struck. Captain Chun, monitoring through the range's high-powered observation scope, leaned forward with intense concentration. Her voice carried across the suddenly silent range with crystalline clarity. Target hit. Dime is. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Jesus Christ. She paused, adjusting the focus on her scope, as if unable to believe what she was seeing. The dime is split, clean split down the middle. Both halves are still on the stand. The silence that followed was profound, broken only by the whistle of wind through the canyon. Elena finally lifted her head from the scope, her expression unchanged, as if splitting a dime at 1,000 yards in crosswind was merely Tuesday morning routine. Staff Sergeant Holbrook's face cycled through several colors before settling on a sickly pale. His mouth opened and closed like a fish pulled from water, no sound emerging. Around him, his usual crowd of supporters had melted away, suddenly finding their equipment in desperate need of attention. "That's impossible," Holbrook finally managed, his voice cracking slightly. "Nobody makes that shot. Nobody." Elena began the methodical process of securing her rifle, wrapping it back in its worn canvas covering with the same care she'd shown throughout the entire demonstration. "You owe me an apology," she said quietly, not looking up from her work. "To every shooter on this range, as I recall." The crowd began to stir as the reality of what they'd witnessed sank in. Phones that had been recording Holbrook's expected humiliation of the Supply Corps' interloper now captured something entirely different. Word was already spreading beyond the range, carried by text messages and social media posts that would soon reach far beyond Camp Meridian. "Where did you learn to shoot like that?" Captain Chun approached Elena's position, her professional curiosity clearly aroused. "That wasn't basic military marksmanship training." Elena shouldered her rifle case and gathered her equipment with practiced efficiency. "I had good instructors," she replied, the same non-answer she'd perfected over years of avoiding such questions. But Chun was persistent, her trained eye noting details that others missed. The way Elena moved, the casual competence with her weapon, the complete lack of excitement or surprise at making what was arguably one of the most difficult shots ever recorded on a military range. "Specialist Vasquez, I'm going to need to file a report on this incident. Extraordinary marksmanship displays require documentation." Elena paused in her packing, something flickering behind her composed expression. "That won't be necessary, ma'am. It was just a lucky shot." "Lucky?" Chun's laugh held no humor. "Specialist, I've been running precision marksmanship programs for 15 years. I've seen Olympic shooters, special operations snipers, and competition champions. What you just did wasn't luck. That was skill at a level that demands explanation." Before Elena could respond, a commotion near the range entrance drew everyone's attention. A military vehicle was approaching, its dust cloud visible long before. The vehicle itself, even from a distance, the urgency of its approach was unmistakable. The Humvee screeched to a halt near the shooting benches, and Colonel James Morrison stepped out, his face grim with purpose. His aide, Lieutenant Thompson, hurried to keep pace as Morrison strode directly toward the knot of shooters surrounding. Elena's position. Which one of you is Vasquez? Morrison's voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to immediate answers. Elena stepped forward, her posture automatically shifting to attention. Specialist Elena Vasquez, sir. Morrison studied her with the intensity of a man reading tactical maps, his eyes cataloging details with professional thoroughness. Specialist, I need to speak with you immediately. Private conversation. Captain Chun interceded smoothly. Sir, if this is about the shooting demonstration, I can provide full details. Specialist Vasquez has just completed an extraordinary display of marksmanship skill that I'm not here about any demonstration. Captain, Morrison cut her off, his tone suggesting this was a matter of considerably more importance than range activities. Specialist Vasquez, with me, now. As Elena gathered her equipment, she could feel the weight of curious stares from the other shooters. Holbrook, still pale and shaken from his public humiliation, watched with undisguised resentment as the Supply Corps specialist who had destroyed his reputation was escorted away by a full colonel. Morrison led Elena to his vehicle, maintaining silence until they were well away from the range. Only when they were alone did he turn to face her, his expression mixing concern with something that might have been recognition. Specialist Vasquez. He began carefully. I received an interesting phone call this morning. Someone in Washington is very curious about a Supply Corps specialist who just demonstrated sniper-level marksmanship skills in front of half the base. Elena kept her expression neutral, though her hands unconsciously adjusted the strap of her rifle case. Sir, I don't understand. I was just participating in the marksmanship competition. Participating? Morrison's laugh was dry. Specialist, what you did out there isn't participation. That's demonstration of skills that very few people possess. Skills that raise questions about how a Supply Corps specialist acquired training that most special operations snipers would. Envy. The colonel reached into his briefcase and pulled out a tablet, its screen displaying what appeared to be military personnel records. Elena's photograph was clearly visible, along with text that was heavily redacted. Your service record makes for interesting reading, Specialist. Lots of black ink. Lots of missing time that's classified above my clearance level. Elena remained silent, her dark eyes fixed on a point somewhere beyond Morrison's shoulder. The technique was one she'd perfected over years of deflecting unwanted attention, of maintaining operational security even when direct questions demanded answers. Here's what I know, Morrison continued, his voice taking on the tone of a man laying out facts like evidence. 3 years ago, there was an operation. Deep black, need-to-know basis, classified so far above normal levels that even mentioning it requires special authorization. The operation designation was Silent Echo. The effect of those 2 words on Elena was immediate and unmistakable. Her carefully maintained composure cracked like ice under sudden pressure. Her hands tightened on her equipment strap, and something dangerous flickered behind her eyes before being quickly suppressed. Morrison noticed the reaction and pressed forward. Silent Echo involved a very specialized team. Long-range reconnaissance, target elimination, intelligence gathering in areas where conventional forces couldn't operate. The team consisted of 6 operators, all with skills that officially don't exist in any military training program. Elena's breathing had changed, becoming deeper and more controlled. The same pattern she'd used on the range before making her impossible shot. Sir, I don't know what you're referring to. The team designation was Echo 7, Morrison continued relentlessly. 7 operators, each with specialized skills. Communications, demolitions, intelligence analysis, medical support, close quarters combat, and long-range precision elimination. The mission lasted 18 months, operating in areas that don't appear on any map, targeting threats that officially never existed. The tablet screen changed, displaying what appeared to be satellite imagery of harsh, mountainous terrain. even heavily pixelated and stripped of identifying information. The landscape spoke of remote, dangerous places where conventional military operations would be impossible. The operation was successful beyond all expectations, Morrison said, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. But success came at a price. Of the 7 operators who went in, only 1 came back. Elena's stillness was complete now, like a predator deciding whether to flee or fight. Her eyes, fixed on the distant mountains visible beyond the camp's perimeter, carried a weight that seemed far too heavy for someone officially assigned to supply duties. The survivor was debriefed, processed through psychological evaluation, and quietly reassigned to minimize attention. Officially, the operation never happened. The team never existed. The survivor was given a new assignment, new responsibilities, and strict orders to maintain operational security. Morrison closed the tablet and studied Elena's face with the intensity of a man looking for truth in a landscape of lies. The question is, Specialist Vasquez, what happens when that survivor's carefully maintained cover is blown by a moment of skill that reveals training that officially never occurred? For a long moment, the only sound was the distant crack of rifles from the range where other competitors continued their less dramatic contests. Elena stood perfectly still, her internal struggle playing out in micro-expressions that Morrison's trained eye cataloged like intelligence data. Finally she spoke, her voice barely audible over the desert wind. "Sir, with respect, some things are better left buried." "I agree completely," Morrison replied, surprising her with his quick response. "But sometimes circumstances don't allow for that luxury. Your demonstration this morning has attracted attention from people who ask uncomfortable questions and have the authority to demand answers." He gestured toward the range, where Elena could see personnel still gathered around the target stand, examining the split dime with the fascination of witnesses to the impossible. "Word of what you did is already spreading. By tonight, it'll be on every military forum and social media platform. By tomorrow, people in Washington will be asking why a Supply Corps specialist is demonstrating skills that cost millions of dollars to develop." Elena closed her eyes, and for a moment, Morrison could see past the carefully maintained facade to the weight she carried. When she opened them again, the soldier was back, professional and composed. "What are you recommending, sir?" "For now, nothing changes," Morrison said. "You return to your duties, maintain your cover, and pretend this conversation never happened. But specialist." He paused, his expression mixing authority with something approaching compassion. "The questions are coming whether we want them or not. When they do, you'll need allies who understand what kind of service demands the highest classification levels." As Morrison's vehicle disappeared back toward the main base, Elena stood alone in the desert landscape, her rifle case heavy on her shoulder and the weight of concealed truth even heavier on her conscience. The morning sun was climbing higher, burning away the cool desert air and replacing it with the harsh heat that would dominate the day. She began the walk back to her quarters, a modest single room in the enlisted personnel barracks that she'd called home for the past 3 years. The building was typical military construction, functional, efficient, and utterly lacking in personality. Her room reflected the same austere practicality, furnished with regulation furniture and personal items carefully chosen to reveal nothing about their owner. The rifle case went into a locked cabinet that appeared designed for standard equipment storage, but was actually custom-built to secure specialized gear. Elena's few personal photographs showed family gatherings and military ceremonies, all carefully curated to support her cover identity as a career supply specialist with an unremarkable service record. What the photographs didn't show were the faces that visited her dreams. 6 teammates whose skills had complemented her own, whose trust had been absolute, and whose loss had left a void that 3 years of quiet service had failed to fill. Marcus Chun, the communications specialist who could establish contact with headquarters from locations that shouldn't have had any signal. Sarah Martinez, the demolitions expert whose artistic precision had eliminated targets without collateral damage; David Kim, the intelligence analyst who could read terrain like others read books; Jennifer Adams, the medic whose field surgery had kept the team operational despite impossible conditions; Robert Wilson, the close-quarters combat specialist whose protection had allowed the others to focus on their missions; and finally, team leader Catherine Hayes, the woman whose tactical brilliance and unshakable leadership had molded 7 specialists into something greater than the sum of their parts. Hayes had been more than a commander. She'd been a mentor, a protector, and the closest thing to a sister that Elena had ever known. The operation that killed them had been Elena's greatest success and most devastating failure. The target had been eliminated with a single shot at a range that stretched the limits of both equipment and skill. But the extraction had gone wrong, compromised by intelligence failures and enemy forces that shouldn't have been in position to intercept the team. Elena had been in her hide, 2 miles from the extraction point, when the radio chatter turned. From routine coordination to desperate calls for support. By the time she'd repositioned and could provide covering fire, it was too late. 6 of the most skilled operators she'd ever worked with were gone, their sacrifice ensuring that the mission's objectives were achieved, and that she could escape to carry their story. The after-action reports, classified at levels that required special authorization even to acknowledge their existence, credited Echo 7 with eliminating a target whose death had prevented an international incident that could have destabilized an entire region. The operation was deemed a complete success, worthy of the highest commendations and recognition. Elena had refused all decorations, declined all interviews, and requested assignment to the most routine duties available. She wanted to disappear into the vast bureaucracy of military logistics, to become just another face in the crowd of career soldiers who kept the machine running without drama or recognition. For 3 years, the strategy had worked perfectly. Supply Corps' duties were routine, predictable, and utterly free from the kind of attention that led to uncomfortable questions. She processed requisitions, managed inventory, and maintained equipment that others used without ever wondering about the person who ensured its availability. The shooting demonstration had destroyed that carefully maintained anonymity in a single, perfectly placed bullet. The skill that had made her invaluable to Echo 7 had betrayed her cover in front of witnesses whose phones had already broadcast her secret across the digital landscape. Elena sat on her regulation bunk and stared at the wall where other soldiers might have hung personal photographs or motivational posters. Her wall was bare except for a single item, a small mirror positioned so that every morning she was forced to look at the face of the person who had survived when 6 better soldiers had died. The weight of their memory was a burden she carried, in silence, measured not in the lives saved or the mission accomplished, but in the empty spaces at a table that would never again seat 7. She'd learned to function with that weight, to channel it into the quiet competence that had made her valuable in supply duties, just as it had made her lethal in the field. But now the weight was shifting, becoming something more dangerous than grief. The attention Morrison had warned about was already building, carried by social media posts and forwarded videos that turned her impossible shot into entertainment for people who would never understand what training created such skills. Elena's phone buzzed with an incoming message. The number was unfamiliar, but the content made her blood run cold. Saw the video. Impressive shooting. We should talk. A friend. The message was followed by a photograph that made Elena's hands tremble as she held the device. It showed 7 figures in desert camouflage, their faces obscured by tactical gear, but their postures clearly recognizable to someone who had lived and fought alongside them. At the bottom of the image, written in block letters, was the designation ECH07. Someone new. Someone had connected the Supply Corps specialist, who could split dimes at impossible distances, with the sniper who had once operated in the deepest, Shadows of classified operations. The careful anonymity that had protected her for 3 years was crumbling, and Elena realized that the morning's demonstration had done more than humiliate Staff Sergeant Holbrook. It had awakened ghosts that some people preferred to keep buried. Her phone buzzed again. Another unknown number, another message that suggested her shooting. Demonstration had attracted the wrong kind of attention. Remarkable skill set for a supply specialist. Perhaps we could discuss career opportunities that better match your capabilities. Elena powered off the phone and locked it in the same cabinet that held her rifle. The silence of her small room felt oppressive now, charged with the weight of decisions that couldn't be avoided much longer. Morrison had been right about the questions coming, but he'd underestimated how quickly they would arrive. Outside her window, Camp Meridian continued its routine operations. Soldiers went about their duties, training exercises proceeded on schedule, and the business of military readiness continued without pause. But Elena knew that beneath the surface of normal activity, conversations were happening that would soon reach levels where her carefully maintained cover story would be insufficient protection. The Echo 7 mission had been classified not just to protect operational details, but to preserve the fiction that certain capabilities didn't exist within the conventional military structure. Elena's survival had been an administrative problem, solved by burial in routine assignments and strict orders to maintain silence about her background. But silence became impossible when your skills betrayed your secret in front of cameras that broadcast to audiences who asked uncomfortable questions. Elena realized that she was facing a choice between the quiet anonymity that had protected her since the mission and the attention that might force her to confront truths she'd spent 3 years trying to forget. The faces of her teammates seemed to watch from the shadows of her small room, their silent presence a reminder of the weight she carried and the debts that could never be fully repaid. Marcus, Sarah, David, Jennifer, Robert, and Catherine had died believing their sacrifice served something greater than individual survival. Elena closed her eyes and made a decision that would change everything. Instead of running from the questions that were coming, she would face them with the same precision she'd brought to that morning's impossible shot. If her cover was blown, if her secret was exposed, then she would ensure that the story told honored the memory of 6 operators who deserved better than to be forgotten in classified files that no one would ever read. The ghosts of Echo 7 had been awakened, and Elena Vasquez was done running from their memory. The morning after Elena's demonstration brought changes that rippled through Camp Meridian like shockwaves from a distant explosion. Word of the impossible shot had spread beyond the shooting range, carried by social media posts and forwarded videos that transformed a routine marksmanship competition into viral entertainment. By dawn, Elena's phone had accumulated dozens of missed calls from numbers she didn't recognize and messages that suggested her carefully maintained anonymity was disintegrating with alarming speed. Captain Sarah Chun found Elena in the supply warehouse at 0530 hours, ostensibly conducting routine inventory, but clearly using the mundane task as refuge from the attention that had begun to swirl around her. The warehouse was Elena's domain, a vast space filled with organized chaos where she managed the flow of equipment and supplies that kept the base operational. Here, surrounded by shelves of ordinary military gear, she could almost pretend that yesterday's demonstration had been someone else's moment of dangerous visibility. Specialist Vasquez, Chun's voice carried across the quiet warehouse, echoing off metal shelving and concrete walls. "We need to talk." Elena didn't look up from her clipboard, continuing to count boxes of MREs with the same methodical precision she brought to every task. "Ma'am, if this is about the shooting demonstration, I've already filed my equipment report." Everything was conducted according to range safety protocols. Chun approached Elena's position, her footsteps deliberate on the polished concrete floor. "This isn't about range protocols, Specialist. This is about the fact that your little demonstration has attracted attention from people who don't usually concern themselves with marksmanship competitions. The warning in Chun's voice made Elena finally look up from her inventory. The captain's expression mixed professional concern with something approaching protective worry. "What kind of attention, ma'am?" "The kind that arrives in unmarked vehicles and asks questions about training records that apparently don't exist," Chun replied, pulling out her own tablet and displaying what appeared to be official correspondence. "I received 3 separate inquiries this morning. Defense Intelligence Agency wants to review your qualification records. Army Criminal Investigation Command is asking about your weapon registration. And someone from a department I've never heard of wants to schedule an interview about your specialized capabilities." Elena's hands stilled on her clipboard, though her expression remained carefully neutral. "Ma'am, I'm not aware of any irregularities in my service record." "That's the problem, Specialist," Chun said, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "Your service record is so regular it's suspicious. 3 years of perfect supply corps duty, no disciplinary actions, no commendations, no anything that would suggest you possess skills that made grown men weep yesterday." Chun moved closer, positioning herself so that their conversation couldn't be overheard by anyone who might enter the warehouse. "Elena, I've been in the military for 15 years. I've seen soldiers with secrets, and I've seen soldiers with training that doesn't appear in official records. What I saw yesterday wasn't the result of weekend hobby shooting or basic military marksmanship courses." Elena resumed counting inventory, using the familiar task to maintain her composure while processing the implications of Qian's warning. "Captain, with respect, I don't understand why my participation in a marksmanship competition would generate this level of interest." "Because splitting a dime at 1,000 yards in Crosswind isn't participation," Chun replied firmly. "It's a demonstration of skills that cost the military millions of dollars to develop. Skills that are usually classified well above the level that allows casual discussion." The captain's tablet chimed with an incoming message. Chun glanced at the screen, and Elena watched her expression shift from concern to something approaching alarm. "And speaking of discussion, you have visitors. 3 gentlemen in suits who just arrived at the main gate, asking to speak with you immediately." Elena felt the familiar sensation of walls closing in, the same feeling that had preceded every dangerous moment during her time with Echo 7. Did they identify themselves? "Department of Defense, Office of Special Projects," Chun read from her tablet. "I've never heard of that department, which probably means it's the kind of department that doesn't officially exist." Elena set down her clipboard and walked to the warehouse's small office, where a window provided a view of the main gate. 3 black SUVs were parked in the visitor area, their occupants nowhere to be seen, but their presence unmistakably official. The vehicle's anonymity was itself a signature, marking them as government transportation for people whose names didn't appear on visitor logs. "Captain," Elena said quietly, still watching the gate, "I need to ask you a favor that I have no right to request." Chun joined her at the window, studying the vehicles with the professional interest of someone trained to assess threats. "What kind of favor?" "If something happens to me, if I disappear or get transferred suddenly, I need you to remember that I was a good soldier who did her duty without complaint." Elena's voice carried a weight that made Chun look at her more closely. "Whatever stories you might hear about my background, whatever classified information might be revealed, please remember that some secrets exist to protect people, not to hide wrongdoing." "Elena, you're scaring me," Chun said, her professional composure cracking slightly. "What aren't you telling me?" Before Elena could respond, her phone buzzed with an incoming call. The number was internal to the base, but the caller ID showed only command. Elena answered with the regulation greeting, though her free hand unconsciously moved to check that her sidearm was properly secured. "Specialist Vasquez, report to Building 12, Conference Room A, immediately," An unfamiliar voice commanded. You are to bring no personal items except military identification. This is a priority directive. The line went dead before Elena could respond. She looked at Chun, who had overheard enough of the conversation to understand its implications. Building 12 was base headquarters, home to classified briefing rooms and secure communication facilities used for sensitive meetings. Captain, thank you for the warning, Elena said, straightening her uniform with automatic precision. And thank you for being a good officer who looks out for her people. Chun grabbed Elena's arm as she started toward the warehouse exit. Specialist, whatever this is about, remember that you have rights. You don't have to answer questions without legal representation. You don't have to consent to anything that makes you uncomfortable. Elena's smile was sad but grateful. Ma'am, when people from departments that don't exist want to ask questions about training that never happened, rights become somewhat theoretical. The walk to Building 12 took Elena through the heart of Camp Meridian, past soldiers going about their morning duties with the comfortable routine of military life. She recognized faces, nodded to colleagues, and maintained the facade of normalcy while internally preparing for a confrontation that had been inevitable since the moment she'd pulled the trigger on yesterday's impossible shot. The building's security was more thorough than usual, with additional personnel checking identification and scanning visitors with equipment that suggested heightened threat levels. Elena was escorted through corridors she'd never seen before, past offices whose door plaques displayed innocuous titles that probably concealed more interesting functions. Conference Room A was larger than Elena had expected, with a polished table surrounded by chairs that looked more expensive than standard military furniture. 3 men in dark suits stood as she entered, their bearing and positioning marking them as professionals accustomed to asking difficult questions. The oldest of the 3 stepped forward, extending his hand in a gesture that seemed friendly but felt like an interrogation opening. Specialist Vasquez, I'm Director Harrison from the Office of Special Projects. These are my colleagues, Agent Foster and Agent Martinez. Please have a seat. Elena remained standing, her military training automatically assessing the rooms, occupants and exits while maintaining a respectful but wary expression. Sir, I wasn't informed about the nature of this meeting. Am I required to participate without legal representation? Harrison's smile was professionally warm, but didn't reach his eyes. Specialist, you're not under investigation, and you're not being charged with any wrongdoing. We're simply here to discuss some inconsistencies in your service record that came to our attention following yesterday's impressive marksmanship demonstration. Agent Foster, younger than Harrison but carrying himself with the confidence of someone accustomed to authority, opened a briefcase and withdrew a tablet displaying what appeared to be personnel records. Specialist Vasquez, according to our information, you've been assigned to supply corps duties for the past 3 years. Your training records show basic military marksmanship instruction, but nothing that would account for the skills you demonstrated yesterday. Elena took the offered seat but maintained her alert posture, hands visible on the table surface in a gesture that was both compliant and ready for action. Sir, I don't understand why my participation in a marksmanship competition would generate this level of interest. Because your participation demonstrated capabilities that are inconsistent with your official training record, Agent Martinez interjected, his voice carrying the clinical precision of someone accustomed to extracting information. We're hoping you can help us understand how a supply specialist acquired skills that are typically associated with specialized training programs. Harrison leaned forward slightly, his expression mixing curiosity with something approaching concern. Specialist, we're aware that some military training programs operate at classification levels that require special handling. We're not here to compromise operational security or expose sensitive information. We simply need to understand whether your background includes training that should be reflected in your official record. Elena recognized the careful phrasing. the diplomatic language used when discussing topics that existed in the shadows, between official acknowledgement and classified operations. They knew something but were fishing for confirmation, testing to see how she would respond to indirect pressure. "Gentlemen," Elena said carefully, "I've served in the United States Army for 6 years. My service record accurately reflects my training and assignments. If you have specific questions about my qualifications or performance, I'm happy to answer them within the scope of what's appropriate for my security clearance level." Foster consulted his tablet, scrolling through information that Elena couldn't see but that clearly contained details about her background. "Your security clearance is interesting, Specialist. You currently hold a secret clearance for supply Corps duties, but our records show you previously held clearances at significantly higher levels." The statement hung in the air like smoke from a distant fire, dangerous and impossible to ignore. Elena felt the familiar sensation of operational security protocols competing with direct questions that demanded honest answers. "Sir, security clearance levels are adjusted based on assignment requirements," Elena replied, maintaining her careful neutrality. "My current duties don't require access to classified information beyond what's necessary for supply management." Harrison activated his own tablet, its screen displaying what appeared to be satellite imagery and operational maps. Even from Elena's position across the table, she could recognize the distinctive terrain features of regions where Echo 7 had conducted operations. "Specialist, we'd like to discuss Operation Silent Echo," Harrison said, watching Elena's reaction with the intensity of a poker player reading tells. "Specifically, we'd like to understand your role in that operation and how it relates to your current assignment." Elena felt time slow as it had during her most dangerous moments in the field. Every survival instinct screamed warnings about the trap closing around her, but her training provided the discipline to maintain composure while evaluating options that were rapidly disappearing. "Sir, I'm not familiar with any operation by that designation," Elena said, though they all knew she was lying. The question was whether they had enough confirmed information to challenge her denial directly. Martinez leaned back in his chair, studying Elena with the patient attention of someone prepared to wait for the truth to emerge. "Specialist, yesterday you demonstrated marksmanship skills that are consistent with training provided to a very small number of military personnel. That training is expensive, time-intensive, and typically associated with specialized mission profiles." Foster added his tablet to the center of the table, its screen displaying what appeared to be ballistic analysis data. "We've analyzed the video of your shot yesterday. The calculations required to place a bullet accurately at that distance, in those wind conditions, suggest training and experience that goes well beyond basic military instruction." Elena studied the ballistic data, recognizing the professional quality of the analysis while noting details that suggested these men had access to resources far beyond standard military investigation capabilities. "Gentlemen, marksmanship is a skill that can be developed through practice and study. Many civilian shooters achieve impressive accuracy through dedication to their sport. Civilian shooters don't typically have access to the specialized ammunition you used yesterday," Harrison observed, producing a small plastic evidence bag containing what appeared to be bullet fragments. "This is match-grade ammunition manufactured specifically for precision applications. It's not available through normal supply channels and requires special authorization to obtain." The evidence bag represented a problem Elena hadn't anticipated. In her focus on the shooting demonstration itself, she'd overlooked the forensic details that could be analyzed to reveal information about her background and capabilities. "The ammunition was provided by the range for the competition," Elena said, though she knew the explanation was insufficient for the level of analysis they'd apparently conducted. Foster smiled with the satisfaction of someone who had anticipated this response. "Actually, the range master confirms that participants were required to provide their own ammunition. The rounds you used were hand-loaded with specifications that suggest extensive knowledge of ballistic optimization. Elena realized that her careful anonymity was being dismantled piece by piece, each question revealing another aspect of her background that was inconsistent with her cover story. The skills that had kept her alive during Echo 7 operations were now betraying her attempt to disappear into routine military service. Harrison stood and walked to the conference room's window, gazing out at the desert landscape that surrounded Camp Meridian. Specialist Vasquez, we're not your enemies. We represent elements of the defense establishment that understand the value of specialized capabilities and the necessity of protecting operational security. He turned back to face Elena, his expression mixing authority with what might have been genuine concern. But we also understand that when classified capabilities are exposed through public demonstrations, certain questions become unavoidable. Martinez opened another file on his tablet, displaying what appeared to be social media analytics and news coverage. Your shooting demonstration has been viewed over 2 million times across various platforms. Military enthusiasts are speculating about your background, investigative journalists are asking questions, and foreign intelligence services are undoubtedly analyzing the footage for insights into American training capabilities. The scope of attention was worse than Elena had imagined. What had begun as a moment of pride in defending her abilities had escalated into a security problem that extended far beyond her personal anonymity. The question we need to answer, Foster continued, is whether this exposure represents a security risk that requires active management, or whether it can be contained through conventional means. Elena understood the subtext. They were offering her a choice between cooperation and more aggressive measures to protect whatever secrets they believed she possessed. The gentle interrogation could become considerably less gentle if she continued to maintain her cover story in the face of evidence that contradicted it. "Gentlemen," Elena said, making a decision that felt both inevitable and terrifying, "if we're going to discuss classified operations, I need to understand the scope of your security clearances and the authorization level for this conversation." Harrison's smile was the first genuine expression she'd seen from any of them. "Finally, Agent Foster holds clearances appropriate for discussing Echo-level operations. Agent Martinez has similar authorization. I have oversight responsibility for managing exposure risks related to classified personnel and capabilities." Elena nodded, accepting that her 3 years of anonymity were ending in this sterile conference room with 3 men, whose job was to manage secrets too dangerous for normal handling. "Then we can have a real conversation about why a precision elimination specialist is currently assigned to inventory management, and what yesterday's demonstration means for operational security." The transformation in the room's atmosphere was immediate and profound. The polite fiction of investigating training irregularities disappeared, replaced by the focused attention of professionals discussing matters of genuine national security importance. Operation Silent Echo concluded 18 months ago with the successful elimination of a high-value target whose death prevented an international incident that could have destabilized an entire region. Harrison began, his voice taking on the fire-grade clinical precision used for classified briefings. The operation was conducted by a 7-person team with specialized capabilities, operating in an area of extreme danger and political sensitivity. Foster consulted his tablet, reading from what appeared to be after-action reports. The target was eliminated by precision rifle fire at a range of 2,847 meters, in conditions that challenged the limits of both equipment and human capability. The shot was made by the team's long-range specialist, designation Echo 7. Elena's hands remained steady on the table surface, but something shifted behind her eyes at the mention of the distance. 2,847 meters. The number that had haunted her dreams for 3 years, representing both her greatest professional achievement and the beginning of the nightmare that cost 6 teammates their lives. Martinez leaned forward, his voice carrying the weight of someone who understood the human cost of classified operations. The extraction went wrong. Intelligence failures and enemy forces that shouldn't have been in position to intercept the team. By the time supporting elements could respond, 6 team members were key. The survivor, Harrison continued, watching Elena's reaction carefully, was debriefed, evaluated, and reassigned to minimize attention and protect operational security. The official recommendation was deep cover assignment with minimal visibility, to prevent foreign intelligence services from identifying and potentially targeting the only person who could provide detailed information about Echo-level capabilities. Elena felt the weight of 3 years' worth of suppressed memory pressing against the careful barriers she'd constructed to maintain functionality. The faces of her teammates, their voices during the final radio transmissions, the sound of gunfire. That had announced the end of everything she'd built with Echo 7. Specialist Vasquez, Foster said gently, using her real name instead of the designation that had defined her identity during the operation. We understand that you've spent 3 years trying to disappear into routine military service. We understand the survivor guilt and the desire to honor your teammates' sacrifice through quiet, anonymous duty. Elena's voice, when she finally spoke, carried the weight of someone who had been holding their breath for years. They died because the intelligence was wrong. Because enemy forces were in positions our briefing said were clear. Because extraction was delayed by political considerations that valued diplomatic sensitivity over operator safety. The admission felt like opening a dam that had held back 3 years of carefully controlled emotion. Elena's professional composure remained intact, but the words carried a pain that no amount of training could completely suppress. Harrison nodded with the understanding of someone who had read the classified after-action reports and understood the human cost behind the clinical language. The operation was successful by every metric that matters to national security. The target was eliminated, the international crisis was prevented, and the strategic objectives were achieved. But success doesn't ease the burden of being the only one who came home, Martinez added, his voice carrying genuine empathy. It doesn't answer the questions about why you survived when 6 exceptional operators didn't. Elena looked up from the table surface, meeting their eyes for the first time since the conversation had become honest. They died holding the perimeter while I took the shot. They chose to stay in position and provide security instead of withdrawing to safer ground. Every one of them could have saved themselves, but they stayed because the mission required it. Foster consulted his notes, reading from what appeared to be transcripts of communication intercepts. The radio traffic from the final engagement suggests that team leader Hayes made the decision to maintain position despite incoming enemy forces. Her last transmission was instructions for you to complete the mission and extract independently. The mention of Catherine Hayes hit Elena like a physical blow. Her team leader, mentor, and closest friend had died giving orders that saved Elena's life while sacrificing her own. The guilt of that survival had shaped every decision Elena had made in the 3 years since. Hayes was the best tactical leader I ever worked with, Elena said, her voice steady despite the emotion behind it. She could have ordered extraction. She could have prioritized team safety over mission completion. Instead, she chose to trust me to make the shot that would justify their sacrifice. Harrison leaned forward, his expression mixing professional interest with genuine concern. And you made that shot under conditions that pushed the limits of human capability. 2,847 meters, variable wind conditions, elevated position with limited visibility, and enemy forces closing on your position. Elena nodded, remembering the weight of the rifle, the crosshairs dancing in the scope, the moment of perfect stillness when the shot broke clean and the target dropped. The mission was successful. The strategic objectives were achieved. The target was eliminated before he could implement plans that would have cost thousands of lives. But 6 operators died to make that success possible, Martinez observed. And you've spent 3 years trying to honor their sacrifice through anonymous service that doesn't acknowledge your own contributions. Elena's hands moved unconsciously to her chest where dog tags rested beneath her uniform. Not the regulation tags that identified her as Elena Vasquez, supply specialist, but the personal memorial she carried for 6 teammates whose names were classified too highly for inclusion on any official memorial. They earned recognition that they'll never receive, Elena said quietly. Their families know they died in service to their country, but they'll never know the specific ways their sacrifice prevented international catastrophe. Foster activated his tablet, displaying what appeared to be intelligence assessments and strategic analysis. The target you eliminated was planning attacks that would have triggered responses affecting millions of people. The operation prevented not just immediate casualties, but the long-term consequences of regional destabilization. Elena studied the documents, recognizing the clinical language used to describe strategic implications, while understanding the human cost that lurked behind every statistic. Marcus, Sarah, David, Jennifer, Robert, and Catherine died so that those millions of people could continue their lives without knowing how close they came to disaster. Harrison stood and walked to the conference room's secure communication panel, activating privacy settings that would prevent any electronic surveillance of their conversation. Specialist Vasquez, we need to discuss what happens next. Your demonstration yesterday has created a situation that requires careful management. Elena looked up from the intelligence documents, understanding that the conversation was moving from historical analysis to current operational concerns. What kind of situation? Martinez produced another tablet, this one displaying what appeared to be foreign intelligence assessments and international news coverage. Your shooting demonstration has attracted attention from several foreign intelligence services. The footage is being analyzed by ballistic experts. Your background is being researched by people with considerable resources, and questions are being asked about American training capabilities. The implications were clear and dangerous. Elena's moment of pride in defending her abilities had potentially exposed operational capabilities that were supposed to remain classified. Her attempt to silence Staff Sergeant Holbrook's taunts had created security risks that extended far beyond personal reputation. Additionally, Foster continued, there are domestic concerns. Several investigative journalists are researching your background. Military enthusiasts are speculating about specialized training programs, and social media attention is generating pressure for official responses. Elena realized that her 3 years of careful anonymity had been destroyed not by operational exposure or security failures, but by a moment of personal pride that had revealed skills she should have kept hidden. The irony was bitter and complete. Harrison returned to his seat, his expression carrying the weight of someone about to deliver unwelcome news. We have several options for managing this situation, but all of them require your cooperation and understanding. Elena nodded, accepting that her quiet life of supply management and anonymous service was ending whether she wanted it to or not. What are the options? Option 1, Foster began, reading from official documents, is complete denial and misdirection. We discredit the footage, suggest camera tricks or digital manipulation, and transfer you to a location where you can resume anonymous duties under a different identity. The prospect of starting over, of abandoning even the limited connections she'd built at Camp Meridian, felt like another kind of death. Elena had already lost her identity as Echo 7. Losing Elena Vasquez would mean disappearing entirely into a succession of false names and manufactured backgrounds. Option 2, Martinez continued, is controlled revelation. We acknowledge your specialized background while maintaining operational security about specific missions and capabilities. You become a known quantity with a carefully managed public profile. Elena understood the implications. Controlled revelation meant becoming a symbol, a representative of capabilities that couldn't be discussed in detail, but that served strategic communication purposes. Her anonymity would be sacrificed to serve broader security objectives. Option 3, Harrison concluded, is return to active specialized duty. Your skills are still valuable, your experience is irreplaceable, and there are current missions that could benefit from your capabilities. The thought of returning to operational status, of once again carrying the weight of life and death decisions, both terrified and attracted Elena. Her teammates were gone, but the work they'd died for continued. New threats required the same skills that Echo 7 had brought to impossible missions. Elena looked at each of the 3 men who had laid out her options with clinical precision. And if I choose none of those options? If I prefer to accept the consequences of yesterday's demonstration and continue with my current assignment? Harrison's expression was sympathetic but firm. That's not really an option, specialist. The attention you've attracted makes maintaining your current cover impossible. The questions being asked will eventually generate answers, whether we provide them or not. Elena understood. Her moment of skill had created a situation that couldn't be ignored or contained through conventional means. The choice wasn't whether to change her circumstances, but how to manage the change in ways that served both her interests and national security requirements. How long do I have to decide? Elena asked. Foster consulted his phone, checking what appeared to be scheduling information. We need a preliminary decision within 48 hours. The attention is building rapidly, and delaying response will only make management more difficult. Elena nodded, accepting the timeline while understanding that her 3 years of quiet reflection were ending. Whatever decision she made would honor or betray the memory of 6 teammates who had died trusting her to carry forward their mission. Harrison stood, signaling the end of the formal discussion. Specialist Vasquez, we want you to know that regardless of which option you choose, your service and sacrifice are recognized at the highest levels. The work you did with Echo 7 and the quiet dignity with which you've carried that burden represent the best traditions of military service. Elena rose from her chair, automatically straightening her uniform while processing the weight of decisions that would determine the rest of her life. Thank you, sir. I understand the situation and the need for resolution. As Elena left the conference room and walked back through the corridors of Building 12, she realized that Staff Sergeant Holbrook's challenge had accomplished more than he could have imagined. His attempt to humiliate her had destroyed the carefully constructed anonymity that had protected both her psychological recovery and operational security. The impossible shot that had split a dime at 1,000 yards had also split Elena's life into before and after, forcing her to choose between honoring her teammates' memory through continued anonymity or accepting visibility that might allow their sacrifice to serve ongoing missions. The ghosts of Echo 7 seemed to walk beside her as she returned to the supply warehouse, their silent presence a reminder that some decisions carried consequences that extended far beyond individual preference. Marcus, Sarah, David, Jennifer, Robert, and Catherine had died for objectives that transcended personal comfort, and Elena realized that her response to the current crisis would determine whether their sacrifice continued to serve something greater than her own desire for peace. Elena stood in the desert darkness outside her barracks, 48 hours after the conference room meeting that had shattered her carefully constructed anonymity. The stars above Camp Meridian burned with the same cold brilliance they had shown over the mountains of Afghanistan, where 6 teammates had died trusting her to carry their mission forward. Tomorrow would bring her decision about which path to choose, but tonight belonged to memory and the weight of obligations that transcended personal preference. Her secure phone buzzed with an encrypted message that made her blood freeze. The sender was identified only as Mockingbird, a code name she hadn't seen in 3 years. The message contained coordinates, a time, and a single word that brought back everything she'd tried to forget: Overwatch, Elena checked her watch. 2,300 hours. The coordinates led to a position on the base perimeter where she'd sometimes gone to practice meditation techniques designed to manage the hypervigilance that plagued combat veterans. Someone who knew her habits, her background, and her operational protocols was requesting a meeting in the darkness beyond official oversight. She armed herself with the sidearm she was authorized to carry as base personnel, though she knew that anyone using Mockingbird protocols would be prepared for considerably more violence than a standard military pistol could provide. The walk to the coordinates took her through sections of Camp Meridian she rarely visited, past training areas and equipment yards that were empty in the desert night. The meeting point was a maintenance shed overlooking the southern approach to the base, positioned to provide clear fields of observation across the surrounding terrain. Elena approached with the tactical awareness that had kept her alive during Echo 7 operations, noting sight lines, escape routes, and potential positions for hostile surveillance. A figure emerged from the shadows beside the shed, moving with the controlled precision that marked veterans of specialized operations. As the person stepped into the moonlight, Elena's breath caught in recognition and disbelief. "Hello, Elena," said Catherine Hayes, the team leader who had died 3 years ago in the mountains of Afghanistan. Elena's training warred with emotional shock as she processed the impossible reality of seeing her mentor, friend, and commanding officer standing alive in the desert night. Her hand moved instinctively toward her weapon before conscious thought reasserted control. "You're dead," Elena whispered, her voice carrying the weight of 3 years of grief and survivor guilt. "I heard your final transmission. I saw the intelligence reports. You died holding the perimeter while I made the extraction." Catherine stepped closer, her face bearing new scars that spoke of survival under conditions that should have been fatal. "I was supposed to die." The mission plan called for maximum deniability, which meant no survivors who could be interrogated or compromise operational security. Elena felt the careful psychological barriers she'd constructed over 3 years beginning to crumble as she confronted evidence that challenged everything she'd believed about Echo 7's final mission. The others? Marcus, Sarah, David, Jennifer, Robert? Catherine's expression carried the weight of losses that Elena recognized from her own mirror. "Gone. I was the only other survivor, and my survival was even more classified than yours. I've spent 3 years in deep cover, monitoring threats and managing security risks related to Echo 7's mission." The revelation hit Elena like physical trauma. For 3 years, she'd carried the burden of being the sole survivor, the only person who remembered 6 teammates who had died for objectives that couldn't be publicly acknowledged. Learning that Catherine had survived while maintaining the fiction of her own death added layers of complexity to guilt that was already nearly unbearable. "Why?" Elena asked, her voice barely audible over the desert wind. "Why let me believe you were dead? Why maintain the deception for 3 years while I carried the weight of being the only survivor?" Catherine moved to the maintenance shed's window, gazing out at the base lights that marked the boundaries of their current reality. "Because someone needed to monitor you, Elena. Someone needed to ensure that the trauma of Echo 7 didn't compromise your psychological stability or create security risks." Elena felt a chill that had nothing to do with the desert night as the implications of Catherine's words became clear. "You've been watching me. For 3 years, you've been conducting surveillance on my recovery and adaptation." "Not surveillance," Catherine corrected, though her voice carried the clinical precision of someone discussing operational parameters. "Protection. Elena, you possess skills and knowledge that make you valuable to our enemies and essential to our ongoing security. Your psychological adjustment to civilian life needed to be monitored to ensure you didn't become a liability." The betrayal cut deeper than Elena had thought possible. The woman she'd trusted with her life, whose tactical leadership had defined her understanding of military excellence, had spent 3 years treating her like a potential security threat rather than a grieving teammate. "The shooting demonstration," Elena said, understanding beginning to dawn like a cold sunrise. "You knew about it beforehand. You knew I would be challenged, and you knew I would respond with skills that would expose my background." Catherine nodded, her expression mixing regret with operational necessity. Staff Sergeant Holbrook was encouraged to make his challenge. His psychological profile suggested he would respond to your quiet competence with exactly the kind of public confrontation that would force you to reveal your capabilities. Elena felt betrayal transform into anger as she realized the scope of manipulation that had shaped her carefully constructed anonymity. "You orchestrated the entire situation. The challenge, the demonstration, the exposure that destroyed 3 years of careful cover. We needed to force a decision," Catherine explained, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to making choices that others would find morally questionable. "Your psychological evaluation suggested you were becoming too comfortable with anonymity, too removed from the operational mindset that made you valuable." Elena's hand moved unconsciously to her chest, where memorial dog tags rested beneath her uniform. The weight of those tags had been her anchor for 3 years, a reminder of teammates who had died for objectives greater than individual survival. Learning that one of those teammates had been alive and manipulating her psychological recovery challenged everything she'd built her identity around. "The government agents," Elena continued, pieces of the manipulation becoming clear. "Harrison, Foster, Martinez. They were part of this operation too." Catherine confirmed Elena's suspicion with a nod that carried the weight of someone acknowledging a complex deception. "The meeting was designed to present you with options while ensuring you understood the consequences of continued anonymity. We needed you to choose active engagement rather than passive avoidance." Elena stepped back from Catherine, her training automatically assessing the tactical situation while her emotions processed the magnitude of betrayal and manipulation she'd been subjected to. "And if I choose continued anonymity? If I decide that my obligation to 4 dead teammates doesn't require me to accept visibility that compromises my psychological recovery?" Catherine's expression hardened with the resolve that Elena remembered from their most dangerous missions. "That's not really an option anymore. Elena, your demonstration has attracted attention that can't be contained through conventional means. Foreign intelligence services are researching your background, investigative journalists are asking uncomfortable questions, and the strategic value of your skills is too high to waste on supply management." The ultimatum was delivered with the same tactical precision Catherine had used to coordinate Eco-7's most complex operations. Elena recognized the professional competence even as she recoiled from its application to her personal recovery and psychological well-being. "So my choice is between controlled exposure and uncontrolled revelation," Elena said, understanding the constraints that had been carefully constructed around her decision-making process. "Either I accept assignment to operations that acknowledge my background, or I face investigation and publicity that could compromise not just my privacy, but operational security for ongoing missions." Catherine moved closer, her voice taking on the persuasive tone she'd used when convincing Elena to accept the most dangerous assignments during their partnership. "Elena, the work we did with Eco-7 saved thousands of lives and prevented international catastrophes that would have affected millions of people. That work continues, and it needs operatives with your skills and experience." Elena looked up at the stars that had witnessed so much violence and sacrifice, remembering nights when she and Catherine had planned missions that pushed the limits of human capability and moral complexity. "And the cost? What price do I pay for accepting that the quiet life I've built over 3 years was always intended to be temporary? The cost is accepting that some obligations transcend personal preference," Catherine replied, her voice carrying the weight of someone who had made similar choices. Marcus, Sarah, David, Jennifer, And Robert died because they understood that their individual comfort was less important than the mission objectives they served. The invocation of their dead teammates' names was both emotional manipulation and tactical pressure, designed to leverage Elena's survivor guilt into acceptance of operational requirements. Elena recognized the technique even as she felt its psychological impact. "And if I refuse?" Elena asked, though she already understood the answer. "If I decide that my obligation to their memory is better served through quiet, anonymous service, rather than continued operational visibility?" Catherine's smile was sad but implacable. "Then you'll face investigation, publicity, and eventual exposure that serves no strategic purpose while compromising security for operations you're not even aware of. Your skills will be wasted, your knowledge will become a liability, and their sacrifice will serve no ongoing mission." Elena realized that her moment of pride in defending her abilities against Staff Sergeant Holbrook's taunts had been carefully orchestrated to force exactly this decision. The manipulation was sophisticated, emotionally targeted, and tactically sound, even as it violated every principle of trust and partnership that had defined their relationship during Eco 7 operations. "How long have you been planning this?" Elena asked, her voice carrying a mix of professional admiration for the operation's complexity and personal pain at being its target. Catherine consulted her watch, a gesture that Elena remembered from countless mission briefings where timing was critical to success. 18 months. Your psychological evaluation suggested you were adapting too well to civilian life, losing the operational edge that made you valuable for specialized missions. The timeline revealed another layer of betrayal. For half of Elena's recovery period, Catherine had been planning to destroy the anonymity and peace that Elena had thought were rewards for surviving Echo 7's final mission. "The new assignment," Elena said, understanding beginning to coalesce around the choice she was being forced to make. What would it involve? Catherine activated a tablet that appeared from her tactical vest, its screen displaying maps and intelligence assessments that Elena recognized as preparation materials for complex operations. "There's a situation developing in Southeast Asia. High-value targets, extreme range requirements, political sensitivity that demands plausible deniability." Elena studied the operational parameters, her professional assessment competing with personal reluctance to return to the work that had cost 4 teammates their lives. The mission profile was familiar: precision elimination of targets whose continued existence threatened strategic stability. "Solo operation?" Elena asked, though she could read the tactical requirements from the displayed information. "2-person." "Team," Catherine replied, her voice carrying suggestion rather than direct command. "Team leader with tactical coordination responsibility, precision specialist with elimination capability." The partnership that made Eco 7 successful applied to current threats. Elena understood the offer. Catherine was proposing to reconstitute their professional relationship, to return to the work that had defined their shared identity before tragedy and deception had complicated their connection. "The psychological evaluation you mentioned, Elena." Sighed, her voice carrying the clinical precision she'd learned from Catherine during their operational partnership. "What did it conclude about my fitness for return to active duty?" Catherine consulted her tablet, reading from what appeared to be professional assessment documents. "Exceptional tactical competence, maintained physical conditioning, and psychological resilience demonstrated through successful adaptation to civilian assignment. However, increasing emotional distance from operational objectives and growing preference for anonymity over mission engagement." Elena recognized the language of psychological assessment, the clinical terminology used to evaluate whether trauma had compromised operational effectiveness. And the recommendation? Controlled re-engagement with gradually increasing operational complexity, Catherine read. "Beginning with missions that utilize your specialized skills, while providing team support to manage psychological reintegration. Elena looked out across the desert landscape that surrounded Camp Meridian, seeing familiar terrain that reminded her of places where she'd made decisions that affected thousands of lives. The weight of those decisions had shaped every day of her 3-year recovery, and now she was being asked to accept that weight again. The demonstration at the range, Elena said, understanding the full scope of the manipulation that had brought her to this moment. It wasn't just about forcing exposure. It was about reminding me what I'm capable of, about reconnecting me with the identity I've been trying to leave behind. Catherine nodded, her expression mixing operational satisfaction with what might have been genuine regret for the deception required. Elena, you split a dime at 1,000 yards in crosswind conditions that would challenge the most advanced equipment. That demonstration reminded everyone, including yourself, that your skills represent capabilities too valuable to waste on routine assignments. Elena felt the careful psychological barriers she'd constructed over 3 years, fully crumbling as she accepted the reality of her situation. The quiet life she'd built, the anonymous service that had seemed like appropriate penance for surviving when teammates died, had always been temporary. Her skills and knowledge made her too valuable for permanent retirement, and her demonstration had eliminated the option of continued anonymity. When would the new assignment begin? Elena asked, her voice carrying acceptance rather than enthusiasm. Catherine's smile carried the satisfaction of someone whose careful planning had achieved its objectives. 2 weeks. Time for administrative processing, equipment preparation, and psychological evaluation to ensure you're ready for operational complexity. Elena nodded, understanding that her 3 years of supply management and careful anonymity were ending. Staff Sergeant Holbrook's challenge had accomplished more than either of them had anticipated, destroying the cover that had protected her while revealing capabilities that demanded utilization. One condition, Elena said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who understood her own value and the leverage it provided. The families of Marcus, Sarah, David, Jennifer, and Robert. I want them to know that their loved one's sacrifice continues to serve strategic objectives. Not the classified details, but the understanding that their loss wasn't meaningless. Catherine considered the request, weighing operational security against the psychological necessity of honoring their dead teammates' memory. That can be arranged. Carefully managed contact that acknowledges their service without compromising specific operational details. Elena felt a weight she'd carried for 3 years beginning to shift, not disappearing but transforming into something that could be borne through action rather than silent endurance. Her teammates' sacrifice would continue to serve objectives worthy of their commitment, and their families would understand that their loss contributed to ongoing security that couldn't be publicly acknowledged. There's one more thing, Catherine sighed, her voice taking on the personal tone that Elena remembered from their closest moments during Echo 7 operations. Elena, I'm sorry. The deception, the manipulation, the betrayal of trust that defined our partnership. I did what I believed was necessary for operational security and strategic objectives, but I understand the personal cost. Elena looked at the woman who had been mentor, commander, and friend before becoming manipulator and handler. The apology was genuine, but it couldn't undo 3 years of believing herself the sole survivor of a team that had defined her identity and purpose. Catherine, Elena said quietly, the trust we built during Echo 7 operations was based on mutual respect and shared commitment to objectives greater than individual comfort. The manipulation you've subjected me to over 3 years violated that trust in ways that can't be easily repaired. Catherine nodded, accepting the assessment without attempting to justify or minimize the damage her deception had caused. I understand. The question is whether we can rebuild a working relationship despite the damage, whether the work we need to do together is important enough to overcome personal betrayal. Elena considered the question while studying the tactical Displays on Catherine's tablet, seeing mission parameters that reminded her of Echo 7's most complex operations. The work was important, potentially affecting thousands of lives and strategic stability across multiple regions. Her skills were uniquely suited to the requirements, and Catherine's tactical leadership remained exceptional despite the personal betrayal. We can work together, Elena decided, her voice carrying professional commitment rather than personal forgiveness. But the partnership will be different. Professional rather than personal, focused on mission objectives rather than the mentorship relationship we had before. Catherine accepted the terms with the same tactical precision she brought to all operational planning. Understood. Professional. Partnership focused on mission success, with personal relationships subordinated to operational effectiveness. Elena felt the conversation reaching its conclusion, the decision made and parameters established for her return to the work that had defined her identity before 3 years of attempted anonymity. Staff Sergeant Holbrook's challenge had destroyed more than her cover. It had eliminated the possibility of escape from obligations that transcended personal preference. The shooting demonstration, Elena said, understanding finally crystallizing around the event that had changed everything. When I split that dime, I wasn't just proving my capabilities to Holbrook and the other shooters. I was proving to myself that the skills Echo 7 died for were still intact, still available for missions that required impossible precision. Catherine nodded, recognizing that Elena was processing the psychological implications of accepting return to operational status. Your demonstration reminded everyone present that some capabilities can't be replicated through normal training or standard equipment. What you did requires a combination of skill, experience, and psychological resilience that can't be manufactured. Elena looked up at the stars that had watched over so many tactical decisions, remembering nights when she and Catherine had planned operations that pushed the boundaries of human capability. And now those capabilities serve new missions, new objectives that require the same precision and commitment that Echo 7 brought to impossible situations. Elena, Catherine said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who understood the weight of strategic responsibility. The work we did together saved thousands of lives and prevented catastrophes that would have affected millions of people. The work ahead of us serves the same objectives, requires the same skills, and demands the same commitment to something greater than individual comfort. Elena nodded, accepting the obligation while understanding its cost. Her 3 years of quiet recovery were ending, replaced by return to work that demanded everything she could give while offering rewards that couldn't be publicly acknowledged. 2 weeks, Elena confirmed, her voice carrying the professional commitment that had defined her service with Echo 7, administrative processing, equipment preparation, and psychological evaluation to ensure operational readiness. Catherine deactivated her tablet and prepared to disappear back into the shadows that had concealed her survival for 3 years. Elena, thank you for accepting the assignment, for maintaining operational security during your recovery period, and for understanding that some obligations transcend personal preference. Elena watched her former team leader prepare to leave, understanding that their next meeting would be in an operational context, where personal history was subordinated to mission requirements. Catherine, when we work together again, remember that trust is earned through action, not assumed through shared history. Catherine nodded, accepting the warning while recognizing the professional standards that would govern their renewed partnership. Understood. The work ahead of us will determine whether we can rebuild what the deception damaged. As Catherine melted back into the desert darkness, Elena remained at the maintenance shed, processing the magnitude of changes that 48 hours had brought to her carefully constructed life. Staff Sergeant Holbrook's challenge had been intended to humiliate a supply specialist who seemed too quiet and competent for her assigned role. Instead, it had revealed capabilities that demanded utilization for objectives worthy of the sacrifice they required. Elena began the walk back to her quarters, understanding that her remaining time at Camp Meridian would be spent preparing for return to work that defined her identity and purpose. The shooting range where she'd split a dime at impossible distance would soon be replaced by operational environments where precision meant the difference between mission success and strategic failure. The memorial dog tags beneath her uniform carried new weight as Elena realized that Marcus, Sarah, David, Jennifer, and Robert's sacrifice would continue serving objectives they had died to protect. Their loss hadn't been meaningless, and her survival carried obligations that transcended personal comfort or psychological recovery. 2 weeks later, Elena stood in a different desert, her rifle case containing equipment designed for precision at ranges that challenged human capability. Beside her, Catherine reviewed tactical displays that showed target positions and environmental conditions requiring skills that few people possessed. "Range to target," Catherine said, her voice carrying the professional focus that Elena remembered from their most complex operations. Elena studied the terrain through her scope, calculating factors that would affect bullet trajectory over impossible distance. 3,200 meters. Variable crosswind, thermal updrafts from the valley floor, and target movement pattern that allows approximately 4-second windows of opportunity. Catherine nodded, understanding that Elena's assessment represented capabilities that justified the manipulation and betrayal required to bring her back to operational status. Timeline for engagement? Elena settled into her shooting position, the familiar weight of specialized equipment grounding her in work that demanded everything she could give. 30 minutes to optimal atmospheric conditions. 15 minutes for final preparation and target confirmation. The mission ahead would test every skill Elena had developed during her years with Echo 7, requiring precision that pushed the limits of human capability while serving objectives that couldn't be publicly acknowledged. Staff Sergeant Holbrook's challenge had unknowingly initiated a chain of events that returned one of the military's most capable precision specialists to work that demanded her unique talents. Elena's finger found the trigger as atmospheric conditions aligned with tactical requirements, her breathing steady and controlled as she prepared to take a shot that would affect strategic stability across multiple regions. The impossible demonstration that had split a dime at 1,000 yards had been preparation for this moment, when precision meant preventing catastrophe that could affect millions of lives. The shot broke clean, its report echoing across terrain that reminded Elena of places where teammates had died for objectives greater than individual survival. 3,200 meters away, a threat to international stability was eliminated, with surgical precision that served strategic objectives, while honoring the memory of operatives who had given everything for similar missions. Elena's return to active duty was complete, her capabilities once again serving missions that demanded the impossible while offering rewards that couldn't be publicly celebrated. The quiet supply specialist who had seemed too competent for her assigned role was revealed as one of the military's most valuable assets, her skills protecting objectives that transcended personal preference or individual comfort. The demonstration at Camp Meridian's shooting range had accomplished more than anyone had anticipated, forcing decisions that returned exceptional capabilities to work that demanded their utilization. Elena's impossible shot had split more than a dime. It had split her life between anonymity and purpose, between individual comfort and strategic necessity. As Elena secured her equipment and prepared for extraction, she understood that Staff Sergeant Holbrook's challenge had ultimately served objectives he never could have imagined. His attempt to humiliate a supply specialist had revealed capabilities essential to national security, returning one of the military's most skilled operatives to work that honored the sacrifice of teammates who had died for similar missions. The ghosts of Echo 7 seemed to approve as Elena disappeared into the tactical landscape that had always been her true home, their memories served by precision that prevented catastrophes while protecting objectives they had died to defend. Up next, You've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.